Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to the Association of British Dispensing Opticians' third Social, Environmental and Ethical Summit. My name is Daryl Newsom and I'm the President of the Association of British Dispensing Opticians. I've been involved with the working group for our sustainability programme for about 4 years now. And I say that intentionally because it is a group. It's not just one person or two people, it's a lot of people. I won't mention any names because if I mention one, I will have to mention them all, and there's a lot of them. Many of them working as volunteers, some of them ABDO staff. They've been working hard, they meet up about once every 6 weeks, and we chat and we talk about how we can progress along the progress of the sustainability challenge for ABDO. Sue and I are a little bit short-handed this evening. I'm afraid our sustainability lead, Antonia Chitty, is unwell and will not be joining with us today. So I need to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you have any technical issues with your microphone, your speakers, or your camera, the most common solution for this is to log out and to log back in again. Well-known 20th century, 21st century solution to all things technical. So please don't call for technical support until you've tried doing that first. I must also mention, particularly for our members, that this is not a CPD accredited evening and we have not applied for CPD accreditation. As we move through the evening, if anyone has any questions, I would ask you to type them into the questions box, which is on the right-hand side or the top of your screen, with the question mark symbol on the button, rather than the chat button, which will just transmit that question to everybody. Depending on the operating system you're using, it will either be on the right-hand side or the top. And then at the end of the session, towards the end of the evening, we will have a questions and answers session before we sign off. So I am playing Compare this evening, and I will be introducing the speakers. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to our first speaker of the evening. Dr. Peter Davey is a medical doctor and a public health registrar in the northwest of England. Sorry, I lost my place there. And more importantly for us today, he is the NHS Chief Sustainability Officer's Clinical Fellow for 2022 to 2023, working with NHS England on a variety of projects, including Net Zero Eye Care. It's good to have Peter along here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing him talk about net zero in the NHS and how every member of the eye care team can make a difference. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much for that, Daryl. Right, well, I'm going to go and start showing my screen.
I can hear you and see you, that's all good.
Great, okay. Okay, I'm going to turn my camera off now. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, yes, we
Lovely.
can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Daryl. So yeah, as I said, my name is Dr. Peter Davey, and I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be able to speak to you at this year's C-Summit. Normally, Nick Watts, the former Chief Sustainability Officer, would talk to you and inspire you about what has been happening in the greener NHS and wider NHS as a whole. Unfortunately, Nick is no longer able to attend, so I'm going to speak in his place. And whilst I won't attempt to imitate Nick's individual style, I do hope to channel some of his enthusiasm and get you inspired to take action. Just trying to move my slide on. There we go. So a little bit about me. So as discussed, so I'm a public health registrar and a medical doctor. And last year I had the honour of being one of the Chief Sustainability Officer's Clinical Fellows. This is a photo of us fellows on the right there. And whilst I was on my fellowship year, I focused on how to reduce the carbon emissions associated with eye care. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about three main things. So first of all, I really want to shine a light on some of the areas where the greener NHS has made some real progress in making healthcare more sustainable. I then want to share with you a vision of what Net Eye Care could look like, with the story of John. And lastly, I want to talk about you yourselves and how you can make a change. Oh, sorry. So first of all, progress. And this year, the Green NHS has rightly been lauded as a world leader in pushing for the decarbonisation of healthcare. So this chart shows desflurane, which is an anaesthetic gas that has the global warming potential of 2,500 times that of carbon dioxide. And NHS England has announced that they are going to decommission desflurane by early 2024. This is a really massive achievement, and it signals a real focus on making the operations that we do more sustainable. Secondly, this document in the middle is the Health and Care Act 2022, and it is the first legislation in the world to ensure that net zero is enshrined in a healthcare system. This has made a legal requirement for organisations to move towards reducing emissions, which has resulted in most integrated care systems and trusts having green plans. These in turn have provided real local strategic direction and accountability. And the last bit of progress I wanted to share with you was about reducing the emissions from procurement. So as I'm sure most of you know, the majority of the NHS's emissions, 66% in fact, come from the things that we procure and the supply chain, and that's shown in blue on the pie chart in the middle. So the Green NHS has developed a net zero supplier roadmap, which kind of sets out how we're going to reduce emissions from the supply chain. And to help suppliers with this, the Evergreen Sustainable Supplier Assessment Tool, which you can see in the bottom right, has also been launched. So these kind of things combined really will help the suppliers who supply the NHS to make their operations much more sustainable. Whilst all these things I've just mentioned are real tangible progress, I sometimes think it can feel a bit removed from the people that work on the clinical front line. And whilst I was on my fellowship, I was tasked with looking at how whole clinical pathways might decarbonise, as it is often the interactions within those pathways that really drive carbon emissions. So from looking at the research, engaging with stakeholders, some of whom might well be here tonight, and breaking down the change that we wanted to see, myself and others in the Green NHS have come up with a vision of what the net zero eye care might feasibly look like. And whilst this vision focuses on one particular pathway and involves some aspects that might be unfamiliar to the audience here, I think a lot of the themes and principles are fairly universal to whatever healthcare context you operate in. So without further ado, I present to you a vision for net zero eye care, the story of John. So let me introduce you to John. John is a 65-year-old man, and he's having some trouble with his eyesight. I should point out at this moment that the picture used here is not that of a real person. It's been generated using an AI program using thousands of other faces. So this particular face doesn't actually exist. In fact, none of the faces you're about to see exist in the real world. But for today, this is John, and this is his story. Before John even sees any sort of professional for his vision troubles, he is already engaged with various prevention activities related to eye disease, such as physical activity, smoking cessation, diet, and alcohol advice. The relevance of this is that preventing ill health prevents disease, which then prevents carbon emissions from healthcare use. As we know, the best form of care is requiring no care at all. However, despite the prevention activity that John has already engaged with, he's still having eyesight problems, namely some blurring to the centre of his vision. Normally, John would have gone to his GP or A&E, but he's seen a service promoted whereby optometrists in his local area can be seen for acute eye problems. John is able to put his postcode into a search bar and find his nearest optometry practice. The wider system like the service, as A&E and GPs aren't being assessed for eye issues that they aren't the experts at assessing or diagnosing. And for John, the nearest optometrist is in the town centre near his house. This is significantly closer than both his GP and the A&E department. In fact, it is so close that he can walk. John doesn't know it yet, but he has already reduced the carbon emissions of his care. When John arrives at the optometry practice, he notices the solar panels on the roof of the building. The optometrist that he sees informs him that she's part of a committee that is looking at how the practice can reduce its carbon footprint. There are plans to insulate the building, review the consumables they use, and how staff travel to and from work. The optometrist has been using sustainable resources from Abdo, which she's found very helpful. John's eyes are scanned using an OCT machine, with images saved on cloud storage. The optometrist explains that she thinks John might have age-related macular degeneration, and that she's going to refer him on to specialist services for treatment. The optometrist explains what this will entail, and John is very pleased with the quickness of the service and walks home. The optometrist refers John to hospital eye services by the single point of access, the service which reviews and triages all referrals in the local area. At the single point of access, ophthalmology consultants review hundreds of images from around the local area each week and are often able to diagnose conditions there and then. The consultant ophthalmologist is even able to do this work from her home computer, which means she doesn't need to travel to a remote hospital site. One of the key successes of the service is that there is a good working relationship between ophthalmology and optometry, with feedback given in both directions. This has meant that the quality of the referrals has improved, with some people not even needing to be seen face-to-face by hospital eye services at all. It has also resulted in a better understanding of the different pressures for both services and a more professionally rewarding experience. It has also taken the pressure off the local hospital eye A&E, as most people are seen in the community. Once a consultant looks at John's scan, she confirms that he does indeed have age-related macular degeneration. She informs the optometrist and speaks to John on the phone and explains the diagnosis and what the treatment might be. She also discusses with John where and when would be the most convenient time for his treatment. Only a week later, John is seen at the high-volume surgical hub. He was expecting to have to travel to the hospital, but this hub is in a disused shopping centre in the town centre. It was really easy to get to via public transport. The hub has been set up to be as energy and clinically efficient as possible. John needs intravitreal injections to slow down his macular degeneration. Previously, this would involve a significant amount of equipment, medication, and generate a large amount of waste. However, due to clinicians adopting a green checklist, very little equipment is now used per patient. When equipment is used, it is often reused, and single-use plastics aren't very common. Overall, this has reduced the emissions of each procedure significantly, and it saves the trust thousands of pounds. Due to the overall efficiency of the process, more patients can be seen more quickly than they were before. This has greatly improved sight loss outcomes in the area. The staff working there feel pleased that they're able to make such a positive difference for their patients and that they're working in such a sustainable way. As for John, he is impressed at how easy it was to get to the centre, as well as how quick the treatment is. Behind the scenes, the hospital trust, local optometry practices, and other healthcare organisations are making changes to how they procure equipment and medications. Because clinicians in each organisation have systematically reviewed the equipment they actually use, the number of procured items has reduced significantly. This in turn has reduced total carbon emissions per procedure. When items are procured, sustainable and reusable equipment is preferred. In addition, the emissions from waste has been reduced by standardising equipment packs, as well as segregating waste appropriately. Procurement teams are amazed at just how much money they are saving, while still being able to provide high-quality clinical care. Underpinning a lot of the changes in clinical practice has been real innovation as well as research. Researchers across the eye care system have really driven change. Landmark papers have shown that reusable products don't increase infection risk. Pilots have been tested where small practices are financially rewarded for making net zero changes. And reviews of clinical pathways have shown where the biggest carbon savings can be made locally. But what about John? Last time we were with him, he was getting intravitreal injections for his AMD. Well, he's still getting these injections, but due to new clinical guidance and a new medication formulation, he gets them much less frequently than he would have. while still having the same clinical outcome. As a result, the emissions from both the treatment itself and its travel to it has gone down. He is in regular contact with his ophthalmologist, who uses a smartphone app to monitor his eye health. If repeat imaging is needed, John can head back to the community optometrist, where he can have repeat OCTs. John empathizes with his friends who have to take significant time out of their lives to travel to follow-up appointments. Most of the time, his appointments are over the phone, or he can just walk to the optometrists. As a result, he is able to get on with his life and what is important to him. Overall, the carbon emissions for John's journey have reduced significantly, so much so that the AMD pathway in the area is close to net zero. Not only this, but the pathway is much more financially sustainable, as well as being better for staff. All of this has been enabled by strong net zero leadership from professional organisations, associations, and even regulators. By making net zero a priority, a clear message has been sent to the eye care system as a whole. This leadership has taken the form of joint statements, training, education, funding, and policies. Not only has this empowered those who are already interested in sustainability, it has also engaged those that might be more sceptical. And whilst large organisations have positional power, there has been real net zero leadership from the individuals along John's journey. From those working in community optometry, who have spearheaded change in their individual practices, to ophthalmologists who have embraced digital technology and made it work for patients and for the system, to those performing interventions whose change in practice has drastically reduced emissions, to those working in procurement whose standards have driven change amongst suppliers, and to those researching the best ways to make change in the future, rising to the challenge of providing the evidence of what is needed. All these individuals have contributed in reducing emissions across the AMD pathway. This is the story of just one patient on one pathway and just one potential vision of what the future of eye care could look like. I hope it has shown you just how much potential in the system there is for real positive, sustainable change. And this is just a summary of those steps underpinning John's journey. So with that story, there were many individuals along the journey that made the sustainable changes possible. And in closing my presentation, I just wanted to talk about you, the audience, and some final messages as you continue on your own personal sustainability journey. So firstly, you are the expert in what you do. Use that expertise. As you can probably tell, I'm not an optician, optometrist, and don't work in eye care. And I don't know the intricacies and nuance of your particular job. You, however, do. You know the most about what you do, and as a result, you will likely have an idea as to where you can make sustainable change, far better than anyone else might. Secondly, working on healthcare sustainability can seem really daunting, as there is so much to do. But what I have found is that everyone really can make a difference, and even if you do something small, those actions really do add up and can in turn inspire others. And lastly, making any sort of change always comes with difficulties and challenges. But in my opinion, I think it's worth it. Within healthcare, there's a real opportunity to make a positive impact on emissions, which not only benefits our patients, but also ourselves and our families and the very planet we live on. So I really hope I've shared with you some of my passion for sustainability in healthcare, and I'm always happy to talk to anyone that is interested. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Peter. That was a really interesting presentation. I was particularly interested in the incorporation of telemedicine. I'm sure we'll get some questions about that later. It's a hot topic, as I'm sure you well know. Sorry. Any questions for Peter, please type into the questions box indicated by a question mark on your desktop, and we will try and pick these up towards the end. So let me introduce you to our second speaker this evening, and this would be Dr. Angela Smith. Angela started her career as a research scientist on a project in the early stages of replacing petrochemicals with renewable equivalents. She has since led various sustainability projects within research and development and manufacturing for various sectors, and now leads on optical procurement for Asda. Angela will be talking us through today about a fantastic progress that Asda is making to ensure that their optical practices, as well as their whole business, becomes more sustainable. Angela, over to you.
Hi everybody, thank you for the introduction, Daryl. So let's see if I can share my screen. Turn my camera off. Right. Can we see my slides okay? Go.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. So, oh, that's taken out of slideshow. There we go, right. So as you've heard, I will be talking you through some of the initiatives from a retail perspective. So it's a little bit similar to what you heard before, but I say this is from a retail point of view. So these are some of the changes that we've made over the past few years in Asda Opticians. So just a little bit of context from an Asda business perspective. So Asda does have a huge focus on sustainability. There's a dedicated team and all kinds of work going on. However, as you can imagine, the biggest focus there is on food, because when you're shipping a load of frozen product around and you have produce where you have to worry about soil quality, there's obviously a lot of complicated things going on. However, for buyers like me working in non-food areas, we can still use elements of what that central resource is doing, which is great. We can also pull on our own backgrounds and our own experiences, but the biggest resource we have is our suppliers. And I'm very lucky to have an amazing set of suppliers who've really come on this journey with me, and many of the initiatives that you're going to see today, they've been a huge part of. So I would like to say that the main message to take from my presentation is just, there are no silver bullets. There are no big quick wins. It will take the cumulative effect of many, many small changes to really make a tangible difference to saving the planet for future generations. So this list is by no means exhaustive, but I've put some examples in here to go through to just kind of give a flavour of how varied and eclectic and how it needs to touch pretty much everything we do to add up all these small differences. So I will start with the first topic, which is frames. And the first example is frame materials. So in this area, we have three considerations. We have reducing the amount of virgin material that we use to produce frames, by which I mean, if possible, use recycled material that's already had another life. Moving away from our reliance on the petrochemical based plastics, by which I mean using the bioacetates that you're seeing coming through, which are very exciting and beautiful. And also by being aware of the manufacturing processes of the kind of standard frames that are already out there. So for example, injection molded plastic versus acetate, or metal frames in general. In terms of the first point, the virgin materials, we launched our first brand over 4 years ago now. That was BioEyes. They were recycled. We now have 4 brands. It's a big chunk of our range now in these sustainable materials. Coral was the latest one, and by complete coincidence, they landed in store today. So I can recommend you can go and have a look, and if you don't already stock them, they're great. So the market's just accelerating really fast. It's so exciting to see how much choice there is out there now in the materials and the style. So your eco-friendly customers can now really find a style that suits them, because there's so much choice. I would recommend, if you haven't already, talking to your frame suppliers and your reps about the sustainable ranges, because they've pretty much all got them now. And I would familiarise yourself with the credentials of the different types of materials, including the standard ones. As I said, they still vary a lot in their sustainability metrics, and that's then great because you will have customers more and more coming and asking you about that, so it's great to have that information. The next example on frames is waste minimization. Now, I believe that an awful lot more frames are made around the world than we will ever sell. And working in a grocery business and from an FMCG background, we're very used to range change planning far in advance and working really closely on forecasting, trying to mitigate the production of stock that's not used, giving longer notice periods as we can for ahead of delisting. So it's just trying to make sure that not too many frames are made that aren't then going to be needed. And then in terms of the end of life management, if we've done everything we can to mitigate it and we've still got more frames than we need, then obviously it's try to find ways to sell through. We haven't got to this point yet, but if we have some that we can't then sell through, we will now, going forwards, we will put them into our recycling bins. So all of our stores now have a recycling bin. This is for customers to discard any frames and cases that they don't need anymore. And that's great. These are being then changed into retail kit. So it's a nice closed loop setup there. So they're all my points to make for now on frames. And the next topic is cases. So I believe we were the first to market with recycled PET material cases. Now, we landed them in the height of the pandemic. As you can imagine, back, if you can remember, when we were all trying to change the way we ran our businesses to do it in a safe way in the new constraints of the pandemic. So we paused the majority of our projects. This was one that I felt really passionate that we kept pushing on. And I'm really pleased that Millmead, who were our partners on it, that they were happy to carry on working in those difficult times. The reason this was important to me is, as well as the recycled material, so it's reducing the amount of virgin material being used, but also they were flat packed, which means there's a huge reduction in carbon emissions, because obviously with hard cases we're air freighting a huge amount of air around the world. So this was a nice improvement on our metrics and the right thing to do. So we now have all of our retail cases are fully recycled and about half of our giveaway cases at the moment, and we have more to come next year. So watch this space. So the next topic is tertiary packaging. So from a grocery world where all costs are very, very, very tightly managed, because you're talking about, small cost goods, tertiary packaging serves the purpose of protecting the product or the primary packaging that the consumer will receive from damage in transit and then in storage. And the aim is to use the least amount possible, because otherwise it just goes in the bin, no one ever sees it, it's just a temporary shield. So it's always to have the least amount you can, but to protect the product so you don't end up wasting product because it gets damaged. Now, when I came into the optical world about 7 years ago, I was really surprised to see examples like the one on the left. There's a huge amount of packaging for one frame. So I know that the world's moved on a lot now and you'll be seeing less packaging. I've had these conversations with quite a few suppliers now, and they were surprised at the triviality of the conversation at the time. But obviously the awareness has really grown, and I'm really pleased to see less tertiary packaging moving around now. My recommendation is that you only really need one temple sleeve cover to stop the temples from damaging on each other, and either a poly bag or a case, depending on how it's been moved around. So I would urge you to talk to your suppliers, your sales reps, to push back if you are receiving a huge amount of tertiary packaging that you then need to waste. You can save them a lot of money as suppliers, and also you can save the world. What's not to like? Right, the next topic is contact lenses. Now, obviously it's more difficult to make changes on the product and the packaging for contact lenses, because, as you are all fully aware, it's a product that makes direct contact with eyeballs. So it's more difficult to make the changes, but these suppliers are working just as hard on looking at what the changes they can make. So there is more coming on the horizon. It just obviously wasn't as easy to bring as quickly to market as it was for spectacles. I do have a few examples of kind of trading around contact lenses to go through here. So the first one is we moved all of our fulfillment for store and online orders to a third party. We use Adaro that minimises the number of freight and the courier trips. So overall, for the same amount of product moving around, there are less journeys being made and less emissions being given out. And I won't labour the point on tertiary packaging. I think I covered that enough, but just to say that Adaro did reduce their tertiary packaging from the manufacturers and onto us, and the product is no more damaged. So that was a success story there. The third example on contact lenses. So this is one of those projects that did get put on hold during the pandemic. It was quite a complicated one. I haven't been able to get it going again yet because some of the people aren't around in the same roles, but I'm hoping to get this one going again next year. So it was a big project with 3 different partners, included the logistics elements. It was closed loop recycling on the contact lenses and the packaging to recycle them down into something that's used within our industry. So hopefully sometime in the future, I'll have an update on that project. So the next topic is stores. So this isn't necessarily optical in particular. So these are wider ASDA initiatives that within our practices with the units in store, we still get the benefit. So these, and hopefully there's something relevant for you guys on these. So the first example here is POS, the point of sale temporary signage that is just there to talk about price or an event, and it's not there for very long. It is where possible made from recycled materials, but in any case, all of it is fully recyclable, either card or easily recyclable plastic. So that was a good move forward. And in terms of general signage, so the more permanent signs that can be up for a number of years, we do have a new specification of material which is easier to recycle, but obviously we're only changing over to that when the upgrade is required because it's damaged or no longer relevant. Otherwise it's counterproductive to start taking signs down and replacing them and creating more energy needed for recycling. So, but going forwards, they will all be in this new material. The second point on stores is one of our proudest achievements. So we have zero waste to landfill, which was no mean feat in a huge food business. So all stores waste goes to be either reused, recycled or redistributed. I would recommend, I wouldn't say rummage through your bins, but be aware of the type of rubbish that you don't currently have a route for that does go into the normal refuse and ultimately goes on to landfill. If you could talk to your local or national recycling centres to find as a route that if you can, a commercial route that you can use to get those recycled. And actually, I think there's a talk later on today, so you might get some more information there as well. The final point on stores is water. I have a couple of sub points on this one. So the first one is maintenance. Did you know that a dripping tap can lose up to 165 gallons of water per month? That's more water than one person uses in 2 weeks. It's quite mind-blowing. So we now move much more quickly on maintenance with plumbing, so taps, little washers under cupboard units, everything, because the amount of water you can easily then stop going from being needed to be processed. Incredible. So I would recommend you all to not delay your repairs if you see anything needing doing. So the cumulative effect around the country of these drips is quite scary. And then in terms of awareness, I think consciously everyone thinks, yes, I know not to have water running when I don't need it. But ASDA did find one particular example and tried to advertise it on toilet doors because it's a toilet related problem. When you go to the loo, and if you have 2 buttons where one is the high flush and one is the low flush, how many people don't really look and just press one arbitrarily and then go off for the rest of their day? Now, if you choose the high one instead of the low one when you didn't need the high one, that's an additional 1.2 litres of water just in that one flush. So if you can imagine all those loos around the country, around the world, it's a huge amount of water going through being processed unnecessarily. So it's just an example, a little bit of a sign up just to remind people of what the buttons mean, can make a big difference. And then the final slide you'll be pleased to hear is on logistics and travel. So the first example here, deliveries. So we work with our suppliers with forward forecasting and planning delivery dates around trying to have sea freight where possible rather than air on the big scale. And then more locally, we moved our deliveries to store from the glazing labs and from the contact lens distribution centre to be overnight. So that's when the roads are less congested. You have less emissions when you're stopping and starting less. So it did involve having lockers put outside the store. So obviously that won't be right for everyone, but if you can make that work, I would really recommend it. It's great operationally as well, but obviously it's amazing to put less carbon into the world for the same amount of work. And the second point here, well, obviously we are all here together on a webinar, so we are embracing the huge reduction in carbon footprint that comes from virtual meetings. Obviously in the pandemic, that hugely accelerated this, but I do wonder how many meetings we're slipping back into old habits. There's definitely a place for face-to-face meetings. You can really make efficient decision making. There are obviously times you need to see kit, there are times such as that, but I would push people to really make a conscious decision on what format they need for that meeting, because the carbon reduction is complete, isn't it, if you're at home doing it? So you don't get many wins like that. About 90% of my work meetings are on video, and I would say our business wheels are still turning, and that still feels right for us. The final point, just a quick one. So Asda was the first British supermarket to commit to switching all 600 plus company vehicles to electric by 2025. That's underway and going very well, which is great because that's tackling employee travel emissions. Right, just to close, we've just got a couple of points. The first one is just a reminder that what I said at the start. You don't need to remember all these particular points. I just wanted to remember the overarching message that you do need to pick away at lots of small things for us to make a big difference. And that's exactly the same as the presentation you saw before. We just need to look at absolutely everything we buy and sell, our services, all our processes. All these little things will add up, and then that's what will save the planet, ultimately. My final, I promise now, point is, it's not always easy to get it right, but please don't let that put you off. It is better to try and learn and evolve our industry into a more sustainable one than to avoid changes for fear of getting it wrong, or for just not having enough time, because the time really is now. In fact, yes, it was yesterday, so let's crack on. And as a sweetener, remember that there are often huge positive side benefits from many of these changes. So the obvious ones are, if you reduce waste, that reduces cost, and that can improve your net profit, or even better, you can pass that on to a price saving for your customers. And another little one is, you'll be less tired from travel if you have more video meetings. Right, that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Isn't it good that such a large company has a sustainable attitude? And it's not just our sector. As Angela says, it seems to go across the whole of the company. Absolutely fantastic. So time check, we're a little bit behind, but that was so enjoyable I couldn't interrupt. So let me move on and introduce Dr. Matt Sawyer. Dr. Matt Sawyer worked as a GP for over 17 years in the northeast of England. He now runs an environmentally sustainability consultancy, Sea Sustainability, working to improve human and planetary health. He covers sustainability issues facing healthcare, including understanding their carbon emissions footprint and helping to provide roadmaps and action plans to meet the NHS net zero ambition. He has an MSc in corporate sustainability and environmental management. And Matt will be taking two topics this evening. The first, he will address one of our trickiest challenges, looking at buildings and the energy we use. Over to you, Matt.
Fab, thank you very, very much. I always forget how much we write when asked to do a little bit of a bio about ourselves. So I apologise for that, rambling on a little bit. So first of all, thank you very, very much for having me this evening. I feel very, very honoured to be here. Great listening to Peter, always good to hear from him, and some of the work that's being done centrally by Greener NHS and NHS England. And again from Angela, I think that I would again highlight that it's those cumulative impact and actions by many organisations and many individuals, and it's lots and lots and lots of actions, not just one, and that we really shouldn't fear failure when it comes to doing something. So By background, I'm a GP, but I really have spent the last decade or so just looking at environmental sustainability and environmental issues connected with primary care. And I'm just going to take you back a little bit. I never like to make assumptions on people. So I'm going to talk about energy and estates, and really talk from an English perspective. So thank you for everybody who's joined from elsewhere. We generally use gas or oil for heating, mainly gas, and electricity is often used for the equipment that we run, and for some places heating. And there's two numbers that we need to think about. First of all is a kilowatt. This is the amount of power that an item uses, and energy, which is how much energy, which is how much power it uses in an hour or in a given period of time. And so a lot of the time we measure how many kilowatt hours of energy we use at home or in our workplace, and it's abbreviated to kWh. And we can actually compare how much energy different practices, different properties, different buildings use by comparing the amount of energy per meter squared of floor space. So you can actually start to work out whether your building, your premises are better or worse in terms of energy efficiency than your neighbours, your competitors down the road. And in England, at least, there are energy performance certificates, or EPCs, which if you Google EPC, you can have put in your postcode and find your energy performance certificate. And on there, you'll get a couple of numbers. One is on a rating scale of 0 to 150. And you kind of hope that you can be up at the top, sort of an A or a B or a C, suggests that you're more energy efficient. But you will also find the number of kilowatt hours per meter squared that your practice or premise uses. And there's a few documents that go behind energy and estates. The first, Peter mentioned, it's the Health and Social Care Act, and there's only one sentence in there which is really, really useful, and it says, duties as to climate change. NHS England must, in the exercise of its functions, have regard to the need to contribute towards compliance with Section 1 of the Climate Change Act 2008. What that basically means is that a lawyer's got hold of it, and it says that the NHS must work towards a net zero emissions target. So the country's had a net zero emission target since 2000. Well, the first Climate Change Act was 2008, so 15 years or so, but the NHS has got a legal duty as well. The second is a document on NHS net zero building standards. So these are the standards that they expect buildings across their entire lifetime are going to be emitting and getting them down to zero. So again, it's very useful, particularly if you're involved from an estates perspective. But that's quite a complex, quite a technical document. So it'd be great if there was something that was a little bit easier to read. And actually, the Delivering a Net Zero National Health Service is an easy to read document. I will put all of these links into the chat, or we can send them around afterwards. But again, actually, this is where the NHS has put its how are we going to get to zero? How are we doing at the moment? And what is our plan? And actually, related to that is the Net Zero Carbon Delivery Plan. And that's what I'm going to highlight in a little bit over the next 5 minutes or so. Again, it's actually quite an easy read. But first of all, I'm just going to ask, I'm going to read these 10 things or so, and I'm going to ask which action you would put top of the list to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the most. Would it be to use renewable electricity? Would it be to lower room temperature, to produce renewable electricity, to renovate and refurbish properties, to install smart metering, better thermal insulation or a heat pump, going for a passive house standard building, or have renewable based heating, not electricity, heating, or have more efficient appliances? And I'll come back and give you the answer to this in a moment, but this is quite useful because it starts to put people, what actions could I take? What actions should I take? What actions would be most impactful? And this diagram actually starts to give us some of the answers. So this is taken from that fourth document, that net zero, or the estate's net zero carbon delivery plan. And the first says, make every kilowatt hour count. Now I'm from Yorkshire. I want to make every kilowatt hour count. I don't have things left on standby if they're not needed. I don't have high energy using light bulbs, for example, or other pieces of kit or equipment. I work hard for the money, as I know all of you do. Why would we want to waste it? We should be making every kilowatt hour count as a standard. The second of the four-step approach is to prepare the buildings for electricity-led heating. And this is things like investing in building fabric, in the insulation, in the double glazing, in not letting that heat out of the building. And actually, this makes a lot of sense regardless of what your heating is. You don't want to have, there's no point in putting a high energy burner inside a tent if there's no insulation on it. So actually, having well insulated walls, whether at home or in the workplace, makes a lot of sense. And then actually switching to the non-fossil fuel heating. So we're doing away with greenhouse gases from the burning of fossil fuels. So that means removing things like the coal boiler or the oil boiler. And then step 4 is the one which people often leap to. First of all, increase the on-site renewables. Let's put solar panels on the roof. Now, yeah, absolutely, that is a good step to have. But actually, the estate strategy suggests, the carbon delivery plan suggests that it's the 4th step. It may be the sexiest, it may look lovely on the roof, but actually there's other ones which are to come first. And this is actually tied up to what's known as the energy hierarchy triangle. And this is really seeing how much stuff how many things we can get to the top and how many things at the bottom of this triangle we don't do. So at the top is the energy saving. This is that making every kilowatt hour count, turning things off, eliminating energy waste, whether that be through not using them at all or through things like better, more efficient appliances. And then as we go down, we've got the renewables, and then the low emissions, sort of carbon capture, and then the conventional keep burning coal. So we want to do less of the stuff at the bottom and more of the stuff at the top. But what does that actually mean in practice? Well, this is the heating energy, and in the first column are different energy use in different situations. So on average, in medical facilities, the average amount of heating energy that is used is about 190 kilowatt hours of electricity of energy per meter squared per year. So actually, we've started to get a number. Now that number might not mean very much to you at the moment until you look at your own practice and go, oh, we're more than that, or oh, great, we're less than that. So this is the amount of energy that is being used per meter squared in our workplaces. But actually, there are other options available. So that's the average. Now, if we were looking at building regulations from a decade or so ago in terms of housing, they are suggesting that the average energy use should be closer to 70 kilowatt hours per meter squared. If we went for passive house standard, we'd be down to retrofitting down to 25 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. And if it was a new build passive house standard, we'd be down to 15 kilowatt hours. And actually, the table as we move across to the right shows the percentage reduction in energy use by improving that building fabric efficiency. So going from an average at the moment to a retrofit, so we're not even building new, we're just retrofitting what we have at the moment, we could reduce the amount of heating energy by over 85%. Now imagine if your practice's gas bill went down by 85%. That would be quite phenomenal. And these things are possible. This is from the studies that have been done. So heating energy is one part of it, but electricity is also being used in our premises. And again, we need to think about, well, what uses the electricity? Is it what type of equipment? Is it heating equipment? Is it cooling equipment? Is it other electrical equipment? How much equipment is there? So how many computers, how many monitors, how many lights, etc. And then how long is it used for? And it's actually knowing these different bits of information can make a big, big difference in identifying what uses the most electricity in our practice. And the way that we can do this is actually to create a small table of how much equipment, how much energy does it use, how long is it on for. We can start to see which is using the most energy in our practices from the different equipment that we use. Now, people often say, oh, but it must be lighting. That must be really, really high energy use. And actually, it does use quite a bit of energy, depending on two factors. Firstly, how many bulbs there are, so how much equipment, and secondly, how much energy is being used by each bulb. So you might recognize these are the GU10 bulbs. These are halogen spotlights. People often have them in kitchens and bathrooms and in the workplace. And these are the standard ones. These are halogen ones. These use 70 watts an hour. Doesn't sound very much. We convert that to kilowatts, and that's 0.07 kilowatt. That doesn't sound a big number until you start thinking, well, actually, how many are there in the practice? So if there are 50 bulbs within the practice, within the building, and they're being run from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, Monday to Friday, it's about 2,500 hours a year. So actually, the practice is chewing through close to £4,500, between £4,000 and £4,500, just on those bulbs. What happens if we swap them for something that's more energy efficient? Same bulb, same fitting, but these are the 2.4 energy efficient ones. The whole practice is now spending £150 a year, not £4,500. So changing 50 light bulbs, the return on investment is about 4 days if you went from the first one to the second one. So this is from a GP practice, and this is a bit like from Angela talking about the dripping tap and knowing the importance of maintenance and knowing where the water is going. The same is true for electricity. We need to know what's using the electricity to know what actions we should take. So for this practice, about nearly half of it was coming from their computer use, whether the computers, the monitors, or computers being on standby. And about a quarter of it, this was a GP practice, not an Optom. They had a lot of fridges that were not useful or not being used. Long story short, they turned off 3 fridges because they could save themselves 15% of their electricity overnight. Then they worked on computers, particularly computers on standby, particularly the number of monitors that were being used, particularly looking at the lighting, and actually they reduced their electricity bill by about 20–25% by doing lots of simple things, but doing lots of them, lots of different actions. So just going back to what are the most impactful actions, top of the list is use renewable electricity. Now, for anybody who has got an electricity bill and an electricity supplier, this is something which can be done today. We don't need to worry about putting a heat pump in this week, although that is high up on the list. We can change energy or electricity provider very, very soon indeed, and certainly having a look at that. So there were 5 actions that we can do. First of all, have a look at the energy supplier. If it's not 100% renewable, change it. Secondly, do a very simple energy audit. How much equipment is there? How long is it on for? How much is it using? Third is looking at the behavior changes that can be done across the team. This is a real team approach. We've all got a role, we've all got a responsibility. Fourth, have a look at that procurement policy. If equipment needs replacing, updating, or buying, what does the procurement policy say about energy efficiency? Are you going for something which is going to last you a long time? And finally, prepare for future needs. So this is electricity-led heating. And I'm going to stop at that point and unshare my screen and hand you back. Over to you, Darryl.
Thank you, Matt. That is absolutely fascinating. I doubt there is anybody watching this evening that hasn't learned something already. And I think we'll all return to work and start to try chipping away. That's very insightful. Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is a fellow dispensing optician. Millie Fellows, FBDO, is a dispensing optician from Oxfordshire and experienced practice leader of over 25 years. She is secretary to Oxfordshire Local Optometric Committee, LOXU Non-Executive Clinical Director, LOXU Remuneration Committee Chair, and LOXU Board Liaison Northwest LOC Regional Forum. Millie is also a regional lead for ABDO and has recently been appointed a Fitness to Practice panel member for the General Optical Council. Congratulations, Millie. Oxfordshire LOC has been making great strides in sustainability, and Millie is here to explain how they are making steps towards it and how your LOC, AOC, ROC could do that too. Millie, over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
We can? Well, yes.
Yep.
And we can hear you.
Good. Okay, let's just go back to the beginning. So thank you for the introduction. So yes, my name's Millie, and as Darryl kindly said, I'm a dispensing optician over here in Oxfordshire. My role on the LOXU board, along with my 3 colleagues, is to represent all LOCs in England, bringing the experience and knowledge of LOCs to LOXU so that they can help support LOCs to deliver for their practitioners and ultimately patients. I'm here to talk to you about the sustainability journey we have made as a committee and how my role as an LOC representative on the board is helping to support the actions and tackle the challenges. I'm not here as an expert, but as somebody with a passion for sustainability, as with all my previous colleagues on this presentation this evening. I'm not here to give you all the answers, but I am hoping to inspire you. So what have we done so far? Oxfordshire has evolved over the last few years with a new branding, strategic focus and a passion for sustainability. Committee leadership is the key to the success of a focused committee focused on sustainability. And this will not happen without the united vision from the full committee. The Sustainability Lead was born at our 2nd in-person strategy day, an event we hold biannually. Our Vice Chair Ruth, who a lot of you may know, wanted to relinquish her officer role, but remained fully engaged to the committee. As her other career is as a senior advisor for Natural England, we felt what better than to become our sustainability lead. But what does this mean in reality? What did we actually do? The first thing we did as a committee was carry out the self-assessments tool, which can be found on the ABDO C-Hub. This was a desktop exercise with input from all members, and we were pretty much all virtual meetings and paperless post-COVID, but the exercise really honed our processes. We achieved a gold badge, which we now proudly have on our website, but the aspiration now is to keep it. We are constantly looking at ways to improve and keep momentum. So next steps, we have recently set up a sustainability subcommittee, guided by our sustainability lead, Ruth. They are currently looking at the next phase, which is engaging practices through a nominated champion with a monthly email of ideas and changes made to share with others in practice. Peter Davey, who opened the summit, told me about this quote, and it really resonated with me, and I have a perfect example for it. Recently, a colleague of mine has embarked on the journey of opening a brand new practice, but they wanted to do it sustainably. The reality is that to be truly sustainable practice would be expensive, so opening would not be financially viable. Don't let being perfect be the reason not to try. Instead, like my colleague, start where you can with the possible, such as large stocks of sustainable brands, remote edging, energy efficient lighting, and even sustainable toilet rolls. By making the changes you can initially with a commitment to keep moving forward with the plan and inspiring others to follow is better than not doing it at all because you can't reach perfection. So green credentials, what does that mean to us as an LOC? We hold face-to-face meeting with our committee twice a year. We carried out an exercise using a web tool to find the midpoint from the members' home postcodes. This then informed the central location, which would be the best place to meet. The next step was to find a venue with good green credentials, starting with a sustainability policy. Unfortunately, we couldn't find anything midpoint, so moved 12 miles to the Oxford Science Park. This boasted a thriving ecosystem, lift share scheme, and extensive recycling facilities. Although this was a great space, it didn't fulfill all our criteria, predominantly allowing dial-in options to maximise attendance, as well as reducing travel for colleagues who joined us out of area. So we moved 10 miles from the midpoint to Witney, where we found a great space with a great sustainability policy. This included water-saving plumbing, low-energy lighting, reduction of single-use plastics, hybrid working, reduced printing, cloud-based storage and EV car charging points. And I have to say, I'm really pleased to hear that a lot of these things have been mentioned on the previous presentations. Additionally, they have big ambitions for 2023, including enlisting an organisation to look at offsetting their carbon emissions. We also looked at our expense policy, changing it to include a higher rate per mile to reward the use of car share. So our CPD day. More and more, sustainability became the linch point for all activity, and more so than ever than at our CPD event. This was held at the midpoint of the county as the space we'd found previously for meetings was too small. These are some of the things we did to keep the event sustainable. Sourcing a catering by a company called Waste to Taste. No set menu to choose from, just whatever they had that needed to be used. Delivered by an electric car and a strong social ethic with meals to those in need in the county. A water cooler was hired and all unused bottles were returned, so no waste. No plastic cups, and all delegates were asked to bring their own water bottle or travel cup for the hot drinks. We did provide a limited number of biodegradable cups for those who forgot, so nobody went thirsty. We also asked all sponsors to provide QR codes rather than printed handouts, and delegates were asked to bring a phone or a tablet to access. And for peer reviews, 1 copy per table was provided and returned to the supplier after use. No leaflets, no freebies, printed items from sponsors or delegates, and all the badge holders were collected and reused at the next event. For our next event, we would like to have recycling stations and would like to source a sustainability expert to speak. The importance of sharing. LOCSU is well placed to collate and share ideas, and I am championing this through my role on the board. Alongside the amazing work Abdo are doing with their C-Hub, your LOC represents all NHS contractors and performers, so are well placed to support practices to share and collate ideas. My aspiration through working with LOCSU is to have all LOCs optimise all sustainable options within their own committees. Then, by leading by example, this would encourage other practices to deliver and share ideas, all contributing to the delivery of a statement of intent from our optical bodies. This statement can be found on the C-Hub and sees many optical bodies, including the AOP, BCLA, pledging to support and educate its members in this arena. I recently represented LOCs at the National NHS Net Zero Eye Care think tank with over 40 delegates from across the sector. It was an amazing experience and I'm looking forward to see where this goes. Ideas raised from getting kids into sun specs before to reduce the number of cataracts in the future, to online diagnostics and triage, much like Peter referred to earlier, and solar panels on hospitals. This will be explored further at our sustainability workshop at our national conference in November. So if you want to bring your own thoughts and ideas, this will be a great place to start. It's okay to not be able to achieve all the time. Realising issues and areas where we cannot achieve is just as important to the journey. These are just a few of the challenges we have faced and not yet been able to overcome. We knew the value would be seen in visiting practices and engaging with our members, but this required travel, and whilst we mapped out the routes and car shared, it was not ideal. Then we found it difficult to find a cost-effective way to offset carbon without the buy-in of the community when spending contractor levy, and the fear and reality of greenwashing. And whilst we have the expertise of a sustainability lead, we cannot always be certain we're hitting the mark. And this is where the support and the resources of the Net Zero and Sea Hub have become a much needed resource. And here's a picture of a frosty morning in a green space with my dog Basil as a great reminder of what we're striving for. So it leaves me to close with, have you thought about sustainability? What can you do to challenge the status quo? I would say to speak up to your practice leaders, practice owners and suppliers and routinely ask questions such as, what about sustainability? Is that the best way to do this with sustainability in mind? And even before you start to work, either as a locum or as a new hire or taking on a new supplier, do you ask the questions? Do you have a sustainability policy? And if you're here as an LOC member, add it to the agenda and say, what are we doing about sustainability? And if the answer is you're not a member, well, then ask them. Because if you're here, you're obviously interested, and then maybe think about joining your LOC, and maybe you're the sustainability conscience they didn't know they needed. Remember, small changes are a start, simple as changing your copier and loo paper. So that's everything from me. Thank you for your time, and Leaves, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Millie. We do encourage all of our members to get involved with their local LOC or AOC or ROC. And there is no question at all that Millie is involved with hers. And she is showing us that a DO has a role there and can make a difference. So thank you for sharing that, Millie. Mindful of time, I'll move on. I'd like to welcome back to work a gentleman who's just finished his paternity leave today. And this is his first role back at work, I think. So Andrew Clark holds an MSc in Ecology and Environmental Management. And he has spent much of his adult life as an ecologist and multi-award-winning environmental filmmaker. His portfolio has engaged a multitude of charities, not-for-profit organisations and community groups, right through to high levels of government, connecting people, policy and the planet. Alongside that, he has spent 7 years working on various roles in the family business, Practice Building, gaining insights and experience on the ground in the optical industry. With the release of the Net Zero Optics programme, Andrew's multifaceted expertise has come to the fore, as he's bringing revolutionary sustainable thinking to transform the optical industry and our impact on the planet for the better. I'm looking forward to hearing him talk about an important issue for every practice: how we deal with waste. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much for that, Daryl. And I want to just start by thanking all the panelists that have presented thus far. It's brilliant to hear from such passionate people and about so many issues that are very, very close to my heart. Can I just ask as well, can you all see my screen? Is that coming through okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen and we can hear you.
Brilliant. Right, I will crack on then. We're talking about waste, and this is a really interesting thing for me, right? Because Daryl, you mentioned that we started the Net Zero Optics program earlier this year. When we started this, I was thinking a lot about carbon, and lots of people that we spoke to within the industry went, oh yes, sustainability, that's all about plastic. And they're not wrong, but it frustrated me that there was so little attention paid to carbon. And of course, that is not the case this evening. So much has been said about carbon already, which is absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to talk about that other beast that some would say plagues our industry, others say is the foundation of our industry: plastic. So what I'm all about, and what, you know, a bit of context for what I'm doing. We're going net zero, and yes, that's about carbon. People generally talk about net zero and they are talking about carbon. The NHS has a net zero target, the UK has a net zero target. The practices of anyone listening might have a net zero target. How cool would that be? But you can apply the principle of net zero to any form of pollution or waste. So I can also talk about net zero plastic, in which we would reach a state at which we contributed no plastic to the environment. Now, in order for us at Practice Building to start taking action on plastic and carbon in the industry and to help others do so, we've launched a not-for-profit organization earlier this year, called Net Zero Eye Care, and backed that up with a program that I'm leading called Net Zero Optics, and that's a support-based program. And through those two net zero elements, practices and suppliers, anybody in the optical industry, can work towards these specific accreditations and certifications. Starting up at member, just to say that you're on the good train, you're going in the same direction as everybody else. You can then move through to having certified carbon neutral eyewear, or being certified as a net zero carbon business entirely. You can be supplying carbon neutral audiology, and those are the carbon things. And then in the terms of plastic, you can an accreditation as an optical recycling center, or to be certified as fully net zero plastic as a business. Now, I'm very, very passionate about the climate crisis and the carbon side of things. But as I said, other people have had that covered tonight. And if you want to hear me bang on about why the climate crisis terrifies me to my very core, go to netzerooptics.com. There's a video of me presenting at 100% earlier this year. I bang on about carbon a lot. So, talking about plastic and the plastic elephant in the room, there are a few sort of headlines that you can take when you're addressing plastic and waste. And overall, we want to reduce plastic. We want to reduce the consumption of plastic. We want to reduce plastic waste. So, you'll look for ways to reduce the amount of plastic that comes through your business. And that is, of course, the top of the list. You might also look at reusing any plastic that is in your hands. Easier said than done sometimes. I'll come back to that later. And of course, we all know that recycling things is important. And that it really is very much a hierarchy in terms of addressing the beast. Start with reduce as much as possible, reduce, then reuse, then recycle. And if you're studying your practice item of plastic in your hand, or any other form of waste that may be, and you're wondering what to do with it, and you've got it already, so you can't reduce it, obviously. But you can look at it and think, well, maybe I could reuse this. Can't reuse it. Okay, can I recycle it? In that order. And if it turns out you can't recycle it, it's rubbish. That's the fourth R. You can add as many re's into this hierarchy as you want, but they're tailored more towards sort of supply and product development. You can think about reimagine or revision or review, re-engage, revitalize, all kinds of different re's, but they are the core. They're the main structure to it. And I'm going to just focus for this few minutes on recycle, the lowest hanging fruit of all of them for any practice in the UK. Now, we are faced with a problem in optics that we're talking about plastic, among other things, but we have lots and lots and lots of different types of plastic in our industry. And we also have a lot of things that are very like plastic that aren't really plastic. We've got acetate and bioacetate that are at least partially derived, not from crude oil, but from wood pulp or castor oil or cotton. And they don't have quite the same environmental impact in their manufacturing, but in terms of product, it's a lot like plastic to the layperson. And in terms of end of life, they function very like any other awkward thermosetting plastic. Now, when you're in your practice and you are looking at any given plastic item, not necessarily a product, but anything that's coming through your hands, you might see one of these familiar triangles with arrows in it. Maybe it even has a number, maybe it even has some letters underneath. And you may look for that as reassurance that you can recycle it. Do not be fooled, unfortunately. that does not mean that that product is recyclable. It may be recyclable where you are, but it is not necessarily recyclable. It doesn't account for how many times that has been recycled as well. It is just a type of plastic coat. And let me say, there are many more than 7 types of plastic out there. So what it boils down to in any given practice is what you can recycle and what you can't recycle. And if you're looking at curbside sort of recycling, there's no absolute rule at all because the system doesn't work in the UK. So do just ask your local authority, the provider of your bins. If you live in the East Riding of Yorkshire like me, there's a really fantastic app that you can use to work out if something's recyclable. But for anywhere else in the UK, just ask your local authority, they will tell you. Odds are, working in optics, you'll end up looking at a bespoke recycling solution as well to tackle the majority of your plastic waste. And that was a myth for a good long time, that optical plastics were not recyclable. You know, frames, lenses, etc., not recyclable. Well, we can blow that myth out of the water because there are currently 2 monstrous organizations operating in the UK called My Group and TerraCycle. My Group is UK based, TerraCycle is an international organization, and they will take any old kind of optical plastic and recycle it responsibly into a very viable material. How do they do that? Well, they give you a box and you can put whatever you like in that box pretty much. And it really is comprehensive. You know, you can take any type of spectacle, any type of lens, dummy or ophthalmic, contact lenses, contact lens packaging, safety specs, swimming goggles, and for My Group specifically, spectacle cases. So all those plastic products that we previously thought could not be recycled, they can. Whack them in one of those boxes. And not just a disclaimer, I am not sponsored by My Group or TerraCycle to endorse them. I just really like what they do because they are creating a really simple solution for a better tomorrow. And of course, if you do get one of their boxes, then you can talk to me or anyone else at Net Zero Eye Care, and we can issue your practice with an accreditation as an optical recycling centre to demonstrate to your patients and customers that you've got their back on this one. Now, that's recycling covered. Reuse. I'm going to go up the hierarchy. Reuse is a frustrating one, right? Because we have 2 main types of plastic that we're faced with. We have packaging, and oh, do we have plenty of packaging. Lots and lots of awkward packaging coming through your door, across your desk, through your hands. And you know, one of those type of example bit of packaging, that awkward little bit of plastic sleeve that a frame arm will be packaged in. Many of you may have asked in the past, what on earth am I supposed to do with that? Now, theoretically, it can be reused. You could talk to your supplier, which is a great way of doing it, about taking them back. That does require a certain amount of infrastructural change, or at least habit change. But that is the way to address the issue of packaging. Have a conversation. As my previous panelists have said, you know, extend an olive branch. Ask people about their sustainability credentials and whether or not there's any scope for you to work together on these issues that plague you, that you as an individual in a practice might be able to spot and see piling up behind your desk that suppliers might otherwise just not be thinking about. In a slightly more local sense, I have heard some clients say that they reuse those little plastic sleeves by giving them to the hairdressers down the road, because then they use them to put on their client specs when they're doing hair bleaching, which is a great idea, but isn't really tackling the mountain of plastic in the issue, in the industry. And of course, then there are products. How can I talk about reusing products? Well, many of our products are single use. Many of our products are bespoke to specific users. And I'm hesitant to talk about reusing frames because there are many reasons why you might not be able to reuse a frame. They might break, for example. And people might also be afraid of losing sales of new glasses if you're just reusing old ones. All I will say on that is don't flog people specs they don't need. Always ensure that you're giving people genuinely life-enhancing products and allowing them to curate a spectacle wardrobe. That's the way to stay happy on that. But there are a couple of practices in the UK that I'm aware of that curate a specific vintage collection of frames. Now, most frames are ineligible for this, but it is possible to reuse some of our products, and I encourage you to explore that as much as possible. Oh, and because like Gen Z and millennials love vintage things, it's only growing in their attention. Now, the beast, reduce. As an individual and as an individual practice, you may want to reduce your plastic consumption and your overall plastic footprint. And that ties in to the plastic footprint of our entire industry. So if you are to reduce your plastic footprint, how do you do it? Well, you first have to quantify your plastic footprint. And this is where I'm quite proud to talk about something. Through Net Zero Eye Care, we have developed a standard for net zero plastic certification so that you can say with confidence that your contribution to the environment has is zero plastic. And we're familiar with the concept of net zero carbon and of carbon offsetting. That industry has been around for a couple of decades-ish. The same is not the case with plastic. Plastic, this is quite a new beast. So I'm very proud to share this guidance document on plastic footprinting that we have written specifically for optical practices, but it's applicable to any industry really. And here it is. Oh, you can download it from netzeroeyecare.org/plastic release 2023. But here it is in a nutshell. Everything is waste. Yes, products serve a purpose, but at the end of the day, they all have an end of life. Everything will be waste because we're not at a circular economy yet. And rather like the standard for carbon accounting, we have broken plastic footprinting into 3 scopes of reducing responsibility. Scope 1 we call waste created. Now that's particularly appropriate to glazing labs and manufacturing. If you're cutting down any plastic and just creating swarf, bits of plastic, bits of waste, that's scope 1, not applicable to many practices. Scope 2, however, waste purchased. This is going to be a beast. In scope 2, you include packaging that has served a purpose until it reached your hands. And now it's reached its end of life, its end of use, and you're going to put it in the bin, whatever bin that may be. Add all that up, that's your scope 2. And scope 3, waste sold. That includes all packaging and all products that leave your premises in the hands of a customer. Because, well, look around. People can't be trusted to dispose of things responsibly, exempting a few people on this call, obviously. But you cannot trust anyone to dispose of something in the most responsible way or to bring it back to you for appropriate recycling. You don't know if they're going to dispose of something responsibly or just chuck it out the car window as they pass a primary school. So account all of those things, that entire mass of all forms of plastic that is passing through your practice. Add that up and that is your gross plastic footprint. And yes, that is as unglamorous as simply weighing bits of plastic before you put it in a bin or give it to a patient or customer. But what about the stuff that you previously recycled or are recycling on a constant basis? Well, we consider that. Take your gross plastic footprint minus the mass that you are actively recycling and can say with certainty is leaving your hands destined for an appropriate recycling center, and that gives you your net plastic footprint. Now, once you've been through all of that legwork, you may as well treat yourself to a net zero plastic certification. And if you can demonstrate through an audit that you have done that with absolute rigor, then we can certify you as net zero plastic. And this is where an alliance between Net Zero Eye Care and a group called Clean Hub comes into play, because Net Zero Eye Care provide auditing and certification, and offsetting Clean Hub provide the actual people on the ground retrieving plastic from the environment. Those two things together lead to certified net zero plastic. It's very, very similar to how we work with carbon, and the concept of offsetting is a huge one. I'll acknowledge that and that alone, because it's a very, very complicated, very important concept to get right. And I can bang on about it for ages, but I'm not going to now. So overall, we're a long way from circularity. Lenses are a long way from becoming future lenses. but we all have a duty to step in that direction. Recycling in our industry is a lot easier than you may previously have thought, and reducing the plastic is absolutely possible. Again, this is mirroring something that has already been said by many panelists. Every one of us has the duty and the responsibility and the opportunity to take action. Every action matters, but only together can we truly make a profound impact on the industry and on the planet. Thank you for doing your bit to save the world.
Thank you, Andrew. Every speaker this evening has left me with something new to think about, and you are no exception.
Thank you very much.
It is that our practices produce waste, but it is indeed seeing that waste that started this journey for Abdo. Really interesting presentation, Andrew. Thank you again.
Thank you, Darryl.
My next and final speaker for this evening needs no introduction because I introduced him earlier. Could I welcome back, please, Dr. Matt Sayer? Matt has the benefit of having worked with GP practices, pharmacy and dentistry, and he'll now be sharing what he has learned with us in what optical practices can learn about sustainability from across primary eye care. Matt.
Fab. Thank you very, very much. I am sharing my screen, I hope, at the moment.
You are, and we can hear you.
I think I'm here under slightly false pretenses in the sense of things optical practices can learn from across the rest of primary care. Actually, I've been writing all sorts of notes, and Andrew, I want to have a talk with you about the plastics because I think that this is a great opportunity to learn from each other, and I'll tell you about some of the things that I've come across. But first of all, how do we approach environmental sustainability, net zero, zero plastics, all of these things that we've heard about this evening? And it's often described as how do we eat an elephant? Now, of course, I'm not actually advocating eating elephants at all. But the answer, of course, is one bite at a time. It doesn't have to be quite this big. And really, it's really important for us to understand the importance of teamwork, as we heard a little bit earlier on, about having that shared goal, that shared dream, that shared vision within the workplace. What can we do together? This isn't about one person who might have sustainability in their job title. This is really about all of us being in this together. And for me, it's really important that this is continual improvement. This isn't doing one thing once and thinking, oh, that's it, job done now. No, it's doing lots of things consecutively. There are some actions which might be a one-off action, like changing energy provider, or one or two others that I'll come and show you. There's others which are an everyday thing. What can we do frequently or regularly that needs to be done? And for me, it's very important to divide up the roles and responsibilities. No one person should be doing all of this. We've all got a role, we've all got a responsibility. Now, the thing that actually each of us who are here tonight may have is that inspiration, that leadership, that wanting to engage and encourage and infuse other people. And it's really important that we celebrate some of the small gains, small wins, but not stopping and saying that we've done that. So for me, I think that I would start by knowing what the problem is, knowing what the hotspots are, whether that be plastics, whether that be greenhouse gas emissions, whether that be in our personal lives, in our professional lives, within our practices, and knowing that there are some common areas across all parts of general practice, of primary care, sorry. So energy and estates is an area, travel and transport is an area, goods, services and procurement is an area. We can break clinical emissions off and as opposed to non-clinical emissions, and really it's important that we gather data so we know where the biggest hotspots are and what sort of actions we can do. And I'm delighted that we've already heard this quote from Voltaire, paraphrasing, perfect is the enemy of good. We don't have to be absolutely perfect. And if we think that we have to be perfect, it means that we're never going to take a risk. We're never going to try. We're never going to do something for fear of failure. And actually, now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And for me, that is the important thing. So what sort of actions take place elsewhere? So this was, these are termed no regret actions. You don't need to know exactly the percentage or exactly the number of kilowatt hours of energy you're going to save by doing this. You can just do it. So this was about reducing energy, and this was about turning things off. So this was a GP practice, and they said, whoever is in that room is responsible for any electricity that is used overnight. So if you leave your computer on, or your monitor on, or your printer on, or all of the other things that consume electricity, we're going to put this as, you know, we could do something about this. And so that they negotiated with all of the staff, and they put in place this electricity responsibility plan. So people turned off, and they turned off their equipment at the wall at the end of each day. Within a year, they had reduced their energy consumption, their electricity consumption by 37% for the amount of hours electricity. So resulted in about £1,000. This is one practice doing a behaviour change that cost them nothing, but everybody was in it together, put the £1,000 into the practice's pocket. Didn't need any kit, any equipment. It was just something that they could do straight away. Another practice they wanted to, the reason that this one actually came about was for a couple of reasons, but one of them was that there were problems with the car parking, and car parks were overfull, and so the practice was getting quite chewed about not being able to get staff and patients in. So we did a travel survey, looked at the staff postcodes, and realised that 4 of them actually were driving 3 miles each way, 6 miles a day, from within a couple of streets of each other. And so the staff were asked, you know, would you like to share a lift? And they said, well, we'd love to. We love each other. We see each other outside of work. We go on holiday together. Our kids play with each other, but we can't. And the things that are stopping us is the shift patterns, and the secretary and the receptionist and the nurse, and everybody was starting and stopping at different times. So the practice manager said, well, why don't we just change the shift times? And so they did, and suddenly they started lift sharing. So this was 4 staff in one practice, reduced the amount of money that they were spending, reduced the amount of air pollution, improved staff morale. Only 1 car park space was taken up. Suddenly, a very, very simple change led to lots and lots of co-benefits. It wasn't that they needed to all buy electric cars or anything like that. Very simple behaviour change. And we've heard already about waste, and how waste comes from procurement. If you buy it, then it does become waste at some point. And the importance of waste segregation. Absolutely agree with Andrew. It has to be looking at reducing and refusing where appropriate first of all, and then how do we segregate waste. So this is from a GP practice of how much the different types of waste cost for disposal. So the normal black bag domestic waste, which is what often everything gets put into, is about £140 a bag, but sorry, £140 a tonne. But certainly in some parts of healthcare, they have either offensive or infectious waste. You start putting the wrong stuff in these, and you can see that the price doubles or quadruples. And actually, it's the recycling, the reusing, things like TerraCycle, Refactory. There's a number of schemes who can start to take hard to recycle material and do something better with it than what we do at the moment, which is either bury it or burn it effectively. One no regret action that we can do either as individuals or in the workplace is changing who we bank with. So there are some banks which are particularly harmful to the planet, to our survival. So things like Barclays and HSBC, for example. And there are organisations such as Bank.Green, which can tell you which banks are far better or far less environmentally impactful, don't invest in fracking and fossil fuels and mining and the rest. So there's something very simple that we can do. Another no regret action: talk to other people. Tell them why you're interested, why you're worried, why you want them to be involved as well. So this was a practice manager, this was a clinician who said, I spoke at my practice about the things that we could do that would make a difference. And actually the practice manager only lived a mile away from work, but started cycling instead of using the car. So good for the practice manager to get a bit fitter, good for the community in terms of air pollution, good from a planetary perspective in terms of less emissions. So a no regret action is being able to talk to people. One of the things that I think is really helpful is being able to spread the workload and working together. It means that different people have got, or multiple people have got multiple energy and multiple different passions. So one might be into energy, one into waste, one into cycling and walking. Different people will give different opportunities. Personally, I would steer clear of using the term green champion, because that implies that one person is going to do everything. And it's not. If I nominate one of you as the green champion, everyone else can say, oh, well, I don't need to do anything because the green champion will do it all. Whereas actually, if you know you're part of a green team or a green network or a green community, then you yourself might be the green coordinator of that network rather than calling yourself a green champion. So in terms of next steps, the top actions, lots of small actions, don't stop at one. Plan for tomorrow, but do an action today. Talk to people about the whats and the whys and the hows, and get staff on board, and actually get patients and clients and customers on board as well, because they can be a real driver. Have a look at where your impact starts, whether it be for energy or emissions or plastic, and then two very simple big contributors to our emissions or our environmental harm are our banks and our energy suppliers, and we can make an immediate, instant impact by making a change. Penultimate slide. This is a paper, and I can give anybody who wants it the reference. This is all of the different actions and how significant they are. So I used this a bit earlier on when I was talking about energy. These are the top actions that any of us can take from an individual perspective. Some of them, of course, apply in the workplace as well. Very useful when you're trying to talk to other people. And finally, three things: talk to other people about climate change, make a public pledge and tell people what you're doing, and then, just as we are tonight, find and join your tribe. Talk to other like-minded people. And that's it from me. So I'm going to stop showing my screen and hopefully back in the room.
We're back. Thank you. That was extremely useful. I've learned an awful lot from the speakers this evening, and I've never thought of the correlation between primary care across the board. That's a completely new turn for me. I shall be talking to our pharmacy and dentists about what they're doing to be green. So if I could invite all the speakers now back onto the stage. And I don't believe Millie is going to join us. I think Millie has retired. She was feeling quite poorly earlier, so I think we can expect Millie not to be around. Sue, it is now your turn to tell us about the questions.
Okay, so we've had quite a few questions in, so we'll just do some of them this evening because obviously we are keen to finish at 9 o'clock. But the first one is to Peter. Was a question that says, who is funding the OCT scans, particularly the follow-up repeats? If we're not MEX accredited, we are charging privately for OCT, and that may affect patients' decisions on how to access care.
I saw that question and I loved it, because this is getting into the nitty-gritty. It's not the, oh, should we be doing this? This is how will this actually work in practice. The NHS is at quite interesting crossroads at the moment with the kind of introduction of integrated care systems. They haven't been around for very long, but there is that push to look at, your population and, care pathways as a whole, and a way of perhaps, funding things from a joint pot, with the proviso that actually if you save money in one area, then you'll benefit another bit of it, and looking at the whole system. That's not something that necessarily comes easily, and that's perhaps where that kind of joined up leadership is needed. So I don't have the answer to that question. It was, as I said, it was a vision that I was giving you. It wasn't necessarily the nitty-gritty details, but I think that's where actually speaking to different parts of the system and actually working it out will be kind of crucial, because the cost is important. But if you take a whole system approach, then actually that cost suddenly, if that's borne by the whole system, it might make it a bit more manageable. Hope that's not too much of a cop-out, whoever suggested that question, but I was thinking through it in my head, and that was the sort of best I came up with.
Wonderful. That's lovely. I think you've certainly given food for thought on that, if not an actual, definitive answer. So that's perfect. Okay, so another one was where can the energy saving bulbs be purchased from, an approximate cost? I think that one was to you, Matt.
Online, Amazon, Screwfix, there's numerous places. They are £1 or £2. I'd go for the lowest energy, the lowest wattage that you can. To do 50 bulbs is £50 or something. I mean, you can get them remarkably cheaply these days. There's always that dilemma, do I throw out something that is still working? And that's the problem. The thing I would do with it is I would put the bulbs that you use most frequently have the lowest energy watts, but if you've got one in your garage or in the storeroom or somewhere that isn't being used very often, they're not using that much electricity. They're on for 5 minutes a day as opposed to 10 hours a day. So still use them, but put them in places that are used infrequently.
Wonderful. That's lovely. And while you're on there was one about changing energy supply to more efficient one. I know you did put a comment in the questions, but just to reiterate, while we're on here, someone was saying they find the charges are more than their current supplier if they try to use something that's more efficient and more energy, more sustainable.
Yes, there are. We've obviously had quite a lot of energy shocks over the last 2 or 3 years. All of our bills, personally and professionally, have gone up. This is really why reducing the energy use, you can reduce by 10 or 20%. There will not be a 10 or 20% increase in your energy costs by changing. You can generate your own electricity. But you can't do that with gas. Personally, I would shop around. There's numerous price comparison websites. You can get good deals still. Octopus is up there with the best of them in terms of energy costs, but don't do it. That's a one-off action, but do it in conjunction with how do we reduce our energy use overall? How do we reduce our bills collectively? And then go for the one that will make the biggest difference, which is having 100% renewable electricity.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Right, what else do we have here?
Does everybody nod in there at the same time then, Matt?
Yeah. Okay, another question for Peter. Do you endorse telemedicine for post-surgical aftercare?
I'm really glad that, I think, Daryl, that you asked that question. I can actually answer this fairly informedly. I've got a systematic review up on another screen, and I've got an article from the BMJ, from the most recent edition of the BMJ that came out 2 days ago. So this is fairly up to date. So according to the systematic review, if you move to telemedicine, you can save between 0.7 and 372 kilograms of CO2 per consultation. That's absolutely massive, but it's very context dependent. So you might not save a lot. You might save absolutely tons for our telemedicine consultation. Your specific question was post-surgical aftercare, and I guess it would come down to, well, the kind of clinical situation. The article that I'm going to reference from the BMJ is saying they're trying to cut down on what they call low-value outpatient activity. So in this particular study, they had patients who had long-standing HIV, patients that were stable, as in they hadn't had any real changes to their sort of HIV status or their clinical status, didn't need to have a follow-up appointment from the patient, so therefore they weren't offered one, and that saved, thousands and thousands of pounds and loads and loads of carbon. So I guess the question would be, in terms of surgical aftercare, well, how did the surgery go? Were there any complications? If it was very routine and the patient is clinically stable and they report that, then you could definitely do that with telemedicine. If it was more complicated, if there were maybe more complicated social circumstances as well, if you're worried about the patient, then obviously it might be better to do a face-to-face one. So I'd say it probably depends, but the overwhelming evidence is that it's definitely better from a carbon perspective.
Thank you, Peter. I'll keep your email if you don't mind. It's
Please do.
an area of my life.
Okay, so we have just another couple, I think. I'm in the process of setting up a domiciliary healthcare business in the UK and would like my business to work towards net zero from the start. What elements of the business should I be looking at other than waste, transport, water and energy? I think that's likely to be one for Andrew there.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to try to answer that, but yeah, you covered the big beasts there anyway. One of the biggest challenges that we as an industry face is the embodied carbon products. And there is a proxy figure that you can use for the carbon footprint of any product based on its economic value. That's kind of the standard way of doing things, but I'll acknowledge that it's grossly imperfect. But that is something to consider. So look at the products that you are using and that you're supplying to anybody, and do consider the carbon footprint of them. There are resources online, or talk to me, drop me an email at Andrew@Practice Building and I'll help you go through the carbon footprint of that. And then it's any additional kind of travel is always going to be the biggest one. So if you're domiciliary, then you're visiting people, think about the way that you're traveling. There are many ways that you can drive more efficiently, or even see. Here's an interesting one. I think we've covered upgrading a fleet to EVs, electric vehicles, this over the course of this session. If you're doing loads and loads of miles, that's a great thing to do. But a bit like, is it worth it changing an old light bulb into a new one? The manufacturing carbon footprint of an electric car is colossally more than an internal combustion engine car. So if you're not actually doing that many mileage, it's going to be more energy efficient or more lower carbon to keep an efficiently running internal combustion engine vehicle instead of jumping on this train to get an EV because it feels like a good thing to do. So something to very carefully consider as you go forward. And then just keep your eyes open. There's nuances that you may discover along the way. Many people have said this already. It's not like you hit the nail on the head for the first time and then that's it, you're done. This is an evolving journey, but I love the ethos of wanting to go towards net zero from the start. That's brilliant. And because you've embodied that mindset, it's going to be a lot easier.
Fantastic. I think Matt had something to come in on there.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. We have been doing something similar of start at zero and stay at zero. So how could you provide optometry, dentistry, pharmacy, GP, domiciliary healthcare? How could you start at zero and stay at zero so that you're not about, this is not about reducing to zero. It means that you've never gone above zero in the first place. And that's a whole other evening's entertainment. I mean, we could go into the details. Again, equally, I'm more than happy if you'd like to contact me individually and certainly talk you through what that might look like. It is possible, it's achievable financially and environmentally, but there's nuances that need to be put in place to start with. But no, that is a great question in my opinion.
Good starting point.
Sorry, may I add one tiny quick thing onto that? Because Matt, that's a lovely ethos, and I'd love to know more about that. So yes, we should talk more after this. But we're talking about net zero, not gross zero. Everything that we do has a carbon footprint or any other sort of waste footprint at the moment. So it's very important that we quantify that as much as possible. And the only way to be net zero now is to know your gross footprint, what's left, what you can't possibly reduce now, and to offset it. And I mentioned that offsetting is a really convoluted thing. There are definitely bad ways to do it, but there are good ways to do it as well. That's all I'll say on that. But do look at offsetting. There's a market out there. There are many different options, not just the net zero ICAO route, but make sure that your carbon offsetting is done to an internationally verified standard, that it's as transparent as possible, and make it as affordable for you as possible for yourself as well.
Fabulous. That's great. Thank you. Something I would just mention is that we will try to get all of the links from all of our speakers this evening that have been in their presentations and get them put very easily onto our website, on the ABDO website, under the Sea Summit section, so that obviously anybody that's listening that needs to find them and would like to look at them further can do that. That will be as of tomorrow. They should be available by then. And I think we've just got time for just one more question. This one again is to Matt. How much will it cost across all NHS estates to do all this by 2030?
NHS calculates about 5 billion with £500 million a year savings, so return on investment about 10 years. But of course, we get 10 years of low energy bills, nice places to work that are well heated, and knowing that the NHS has been around for 75 years. We've been providing healthcare. We will continue to do so. I'd far rather make that £500 million of savings every single year beyond that point as well, knowing that we've done a great job. So about 5 billion, about 10-year return on investment is the calculations by NHS England. I haven't calculated those, but I put the link, I think, in the answer as well. The Estates Net Zero Carbon Delivery Plan.
Fantastic. Thank you. Over to you, Daryl.
Thank you very much. Well, I've got to be the party people and close this down. So obviously, there's a few thank yous I have to do. Obviously to our speakers, Dr. Peter Davey, Dr. Angela Smith, Dr. Matt Sawyer. Sawyer or Sayer, Matt?
Sawyer as in Tom Sawyer.
Sawyer. Millie Fellows, Nissa Now, and of course, Andrew Clark. So all of the presentations have been incredibly informative, entertaining, and I think thought-provoking. ABDO as an organisation is committed to helping its membership, and this summit is a reflection to our members' request for help in this area. And that's why we're all here. I've thanked all the speakers. I've thanked the working groups and the people who've helped us through the year to get to this point. I now need to thank the attendees, because without the people watching, we would be wasting our time here. And then a huge thanks, of course, to Sue, who has done all the stuff that everybody else didn't do, and yes, kept me afloat. Thank you, Sue. So it just leaves it to me to say good night to everybody. Thank you very much for your contribution and your time, and we'll see you next year.